April 27, 1953. Three men entered the cab of Big Boy number 4005. None of them would leave it alive. Big Boy locomotives were giants of American railroading. 25 were built between 1941 and 1944 by the American Locomotive Company for Union Pacific Railroad. Each one stretched 132 feet long and weighed over 1.2 million pounds when fully loaded. They were designed to haul 3,600-ton freight trains over the steep Wasatch Mountains between Ogden, Utah, and Green River, Wyoming, without assistance. These machines represented the pinnacle of steam locomotive engineering. But on that April day in 1953, one of these mechanical marvels would become something else entirely: a tomb. The crew of Freight Train 4005 began their shift like any other. Engineer Leo Murry, 42 years old, was an experienced railroader who knew the route well. His fireman, Lawrence Endres, was 23. He had recently returned from serving 2 years in the Korean War and was building his career with Union Pacific. Head-end brakeman James Anderton, 36, completed the crew riding in the cab. Behind them in the caboose rode conductor James Walker and rear brakeman Ivan Shurigar. Their assignment was straightforward. Take Big Boy 4005, 62 freight cars, and a caboose from Rawlins, Wyoming to Green River. A routine run across the open prairie of southern Wyoming. The weather was clear. The locomotive was in good mechanical condition. Everything was normal. Big Boy 4005 itself had a distinguished service record. Built in November 1941, it was among the first batch of these massive articulated locomotives. The 488 four-wheel arrangement meant 4 leading wheels, 2 sets of 8 driving wheels. The articulated design allowed the rigid front engine and the flexible rear engine to negotiate curves despite the locomotive's enormous length. The power these machines generated was staggering. At the driving wheels, Big Boy locomotives produced 135,375 pounds of tractive effort at starting. At speed, they generated over 6,000 horsepower. The boiler operated at 300 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. The firebox consumed coal at a rate that required a mechanical stoker to feed it continuously. When working hard, a Big Boy could burn through its 25-ton coal capacity in hours. But all that engineering excellence, all that carefully calculated power, was about to meet something no designer could prevent: human error. The route between Rawlins and Green River runs through some of Wyoming's most desolate country. Red Desert is well named. Miles of sagebrush and alkali flats stretch in a rush in every direction. The track runs straight for long distances across this open prairie. At Red Desert, a siding switch allowed trains to pull off the main line. On April 27th, that switch was left in the wrong position, open. Big Boy 4005. It was making good time, running at 50 miles per hour with its 62-car consist trailing behind. At that speed, with that weight, the train's momentum was immense. When Murray saw the open switch ahead, there was no time to stop, no time to do anything but brace for impact. 600 tons of locomotive hit the diverging track at 50 miles per hour. The laws of physics took over. The Big Boy's front wheels followed the switch rails toward the siding. But at that speed, the rest of the locomotive could not. The massive machine twisted, lifted, and careened off the rails. It fell onto its left side with catastrophic force. The tender, weighing over 400,000 pounds and still traveling at speed, slammed into the back of the cab. The locomotive's cab was crushed and twisted like paper. Metal screamed. Steam lines ruptured. The boiler, still under 300 pounds of pressure, vented live steam in a screaming white column that shot over 100 feet into the air. Behind the derailing locomotive, the first 18 freight cars followed it off the rails. The first 12 cars piled up in a tangled heap, 70 feet high. Cars 13 through 17 derailed from the force of the cars ahead, slamming to a stop. The cargo scattered across the desert. Tractors, dead hogs, typewriters, sewing machines. The contents of 62 freight cars spread across hundreds of yards. When the first responders arrived, they faced a horrifying scene. The massive locomotive lay on its left side. Live steam continued to vent from ruptured lines, making a roar that could be heard for miles. The white column of superheated steam made it impossible to approach the wrecked cab. They could see movement. They could hear sounds, but they could not get close. Early reports claimed that workers at the scene had been able to talk to engineer Murry and fireman Endres. Hope briefly flickered that the two men might have survived, but this proved tragically false. The workers had been on opposite sides of the toppled locomotive, calling to each other across the wreckage. In the chaos and the deafening roar of venting steam, they had mistaken each other's voices for the crew trapped inside. When responders, they finally recovered the bodies of Leo Murry and Lawrence Endres. The injuries made it clear both men had died instantly in the initial impact. The cab had been crushed. There had been no survival, no final words, no rescue to be made. Just the terrible physics of 600 tons of steel striking immovable earth. James Anderton was still alive. The brakeman had been pinned in the wreckage in a position that offered no quick rescue. As steam vented and the metal cooled, workers fought to reach him. They administered morphine for the pain. They worked with cutting torches and jacks. But Anderton's position in the twisted metal made extraction agonizingly slow. He survived for 2 days. On April 29th, in the late morning, James Anderton died from burns covering 80% of his body and from complications related to being trapped and untreated for hours. With his death, only the rear-end crew in the caboose survived the disaster. The investigation was swift and conclusive. The switch at Red Desert had been left in the wrong position. Big Boy 4005 had entered it at 50 miles per hour. That speed, with that weight, derailment, was inevitable. The locomotive had performed exactly as designed. Its massive strength had not been enough to overcome the basic physics of a 600-ton object being forced in 2 directions at once. There was no mechanical failure, no design flaw, no defect in the legendary Big Boy, just a switch left open, and 3 men dead because of it. The cleanup took 9 hours. Track crews worked swiftly to clear enough wreckage to build a shoofly, a temporary track around the accident site. Rail traffic was delayed, with some westbound trains rerouted through Cheyenne and over the Denver and Rio Grande tracks. Priority was resuming normal schedules. The railroad kept moving, and so did Big Boy 4005. The massive locomotive was lifted upright. Some of its connecting rods, the steel arms that translated piston motion into wheel rotation, had to be cut away before it could be moved. Workers cut away parts of the frame that controlled lateral movement of the trailing truck so the damaged locomotive could negotiate curves during the tow to Cheyenne. At Union Pacific's rebuilt at the Cheyenne shops, one of the most extensive locomotive repair facilities in the nation, Big Boy 4005 was rebuilt. New metal replaced twisted steel. The cab was reconstructed. Systems were tested and certified. Within months, Big Boy 4005 was returned to service. But the locomotive never forgot what happened at Red Desert. The scars remained. Even after repair, the left side of locomotive 4005 bore the marks of that April day. Scars remained. Dents, irregularities in the metal, physical evidence of the day it became a killer. The locomotive continued in service for 6 more years. It hauled freight over Sherman Hill. It pulled tonnage across Wyoming's high plains. It did the work it was built to do. 6 years. In 1959, along with the rest of Union Pacific's Big Boy fleet, Big Boy 4005 was retired as diesel locomotives took over the railroad's heavy freight duties. Retired. On July 21, 1959, the last revenue freight train hauled by a Big Boy ended its run. By 1962, the last Big Boys in operational condition were finally retired. The age of the giant steam locomotives was over. Big Boy 4005 was initially prepared for shipment to Argentina, partially dismantled. Argentina. The buyers could not raise enough money to complete the purchase, so Big Boy 4005 stayed in the United States. In June 1970, the locomotive was placed on display at the Forney Museum of Transportation in Denver, Colorado. Walk up to Big Boy 4005 today at the Forney Museum and look at its left side. The scars are still there. 70 years after Red Desert, the metal still remembers. On April 26, 2003, 50 years after the accident, a memorial was held at the Forney Museum. Families of the crew attended. 2 engineers who had operated Big Boy 4005 in its working days came to remember. They held Big Boy Day, with railroad songs, stories, cab tours of the locomotive, and readings about the disaster. Children made crafts while adults remembered 3 men who went to work one April morning and never came home. Leo Murry left behind a family. Lawrence Endres, back from war and building a future, was gone at 23. James Anderton suffered for 2 days before death released him. Their names are not on the locomotive. There is no plaque at Red Desert. But their story remains, etched in the scarred metal of Big Boy 4005. Of the 25 Big Boys built, 4005 is the only one that killed its crew. 8 Big Boys survive today in museums across America. 1. Number 4014 has been restored to operation by Union Pacific and tours the nation, drawing enormous crowds wherever it appears. These locomotives remain symbols of American engineering achievement, testaments to what steam power could accomplish. But 4005 stands apart. It is a reminder that even the greatest machines, even the most carefully engineered systems, cannot overcome human error. That switches left open have consequences. That routine runs can end in tragedy. That 3 men trusted their locomotive, trusted the railroad, trusted the switch would,